We will continue showing the cycle of loving your neighbors. It's the second greatest commandment, to love your neighbors as yourself. This involves getting into the lives of our neighbors, treating them with kindness, respect, getting to know them, loving on them, and then teaching them who God is. Moving people to love God, to get them here to worship, to teach them who God is, to instruct them, and moving them to serving others, putting their faith into action. Of course, James says faith without works is dead. Paul says that we were created for good works. Our theme this year is straining toward the goal, and our theme verses are Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14. Paul says, "Brothers, I do not consider that I've made it my own, that is, suffering to the point of death. I do not consider that I've made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus." When Paul says, I press on toward the goal, the word means I hunt it down. Very literally, I hunt it down. I hunt down the goal for the prize of the upward call. So as he's straining toward that goal, he's also actively hunting it down. Our theme this year, I think, is really important, especially just given the times right now. A lot of people struggling. There are a lot of people struggling financially, spiritually, emotionally. Life is just tough for a lot of people. And so it's easy for us to get sidetracked. It's easy for us to look back at the good old days. It's very tempting to do those things, but Paul made it clear, I have a goal, and I will strain to make it to that goal. So we as Christians ought to follow suit. Before I get into our scriptures here, well, I'll put this up here, but there's a young man by the name of Andrew Devers, who was in the state of Washington in June 2021. Just kind of as a spur of the moment, he decided he was going to go to one of the national parks, go up in the mountains, kind of clear his head, and just go for a day hike. He didn't tell anybody. This was not a pre-planned trip. He didn't inform people, including his fiance, or his girlfriend, I guess at the time, where he was going. He just kind of, spur of the moment, was like, I'm going to go for a hike. He was hiking a path that he was familiar with, and he likened it to whenever you're driving, which actually happened to me yesterday, and you're kind of thinking about different things, and you pass your exit, and you don't realize it, and then like a minute later, you're like, oh, did I just pass my exit? I literally did this yesterday on the way back from camp, and it didn't tack on a whole lot of extra miles, but I had to reroute and take a whole different way home. It was fine, but he said he was doing that. He was hiking, and he was just kind of thinking about some different things that were on his mind. He missed a turn. There was a subtly marked turn on the trail, and he kept going on what he thought was still the trail, but it ended up being a deer trail or something like that. Before he knew it, he got into the thickets and quickly realized, I'm not on the trail. Panic began to set in, and he said he stopped, he thought about it, and was like, okay, I need to think about how to orient myself and get back. As he turned, he looked at the landscape, and it looked completely different. And he said, at this point, I realized not only had I veered off the path, but I veered off the path of the path, and I was in the middle of nowhere and had no idea how to get back. He began hiking and kind of using logic and thinking his way through it. And he gets to a certain point and gets into some even more thick brush, steps on a stick, it snaps and jams up into his knee, gives him a pretty good gash, and he's now injured, and he's hot, he's confused, he's disoriented, and he goes to open up or reach in his pocket for his water bottle, and his water bottle was on the outside of his backpack in one of those mesh pockets. The mesh had been torn, he didn't know it, and his water bottle had dropped somewhere in the middle of nowhere behind him. He was now without water, without food. He was injured. He was alone. And he had to figure out, how do I get out of the Rocky Mountains in, the middle of Washington? He ended up sleeping the night. He had long hair and pulled his hair over his face to make a makeshift mosquito net. And if any of you are like me, there's two things in the world that drive you absolute insane. One is being covered in poison ivy, which I am right now. And the other is mosquitoes when you're trying to sleep. They buzz around your head, they keep biting you, you're sweaty, you're hot, you can't sleep anyway, and then the mosquitoes it's like a Chinese torture test. And so night one comes and goes, and then he's on to day two and continues hiking. And by this point, he's really panicked. He starts eating berries to stay alive. He identified some wild berries that he was familiar with. He got up onto kind of a high shelf. He could hear a river down below, but he couldn't quite get to it. So he puts an SOS out of stones. He puts them together because he thought, well, maybe if they come looking for me, even though they don't know where I'm at, maybe they can deduce that I'm somewhere in this area, so I'm going to put an SOS up. And he said, but it didn't really help because he said he couldn't tell the difference between what would have been a helicopter and the roar of the river below. So he said it was kind of useless. So he continues hiking. This went on for 8 days and nights. And finally he came to this place where he saw some acorns, literal acorns on a path that were kind of lined up like people drop acorns. And he said it was a path that I recognized immediately. And I knew I was on the path that leads to my car, which was about 1.2 miles away. And he said the amount of sheer joy that came into my life was overwhelming. And he broke down, began to cry. He hiked for a little bit, but because he was still tired, it was starting to get dark. He figured, I'm almost there. I'm just going to spend the night. I'm going to sleep. And in the morning, he saw some hikers, and they could tell he was pretty disheveled, and they asked if he needed help. And he said, I don't. I can make it on my own. But since you're offering to help, please go back, find cell service, and let search and rescue know that I've been found, which they did. He chronicled that journey, and Andrew said, it was really difficult for him because he already suffered with depression. He had some past trauma in his life, and that prevented him from ever actually proposing to his girlfriend of several years. He kept putting off marriage. And he said, in that moment when I felt so alone and so lost and so desperate, I realized the value of life, and he began writing his vows during that 9-day journey, not thinking that he would ever make it back home. I think the assumption was somebody would find his body and he would have these vows written out for what should have been his wife. But he began thinking of all the regrets, and he thought, no, this isn't right. Instead, I need to think about life. I need to think about what can be. And I thought that was really cool, but it reminded me of this passage. Better is a poor person who walks in his integrity than one who is crooked in speech and is a fool. And especially verse 2 here. Desire without knowledge is not good. And whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way. I want you to think about that for a little bit. And the original verse doesn't use the word desire. That was kind of added in later by translators. Desire without knowledge is not good. A more literal translation is your soul without knowledge is not good. Whoever makes haste with his feet, this really lightens it up. It says misses his way. It's the Hebrew word for sin, to miss the mark. Whoever makes haste with his feet sins. In other words, if you're not pouring godly knowledge into your soul, even if your desire is good, like I think about this all the time. I've known so many people who have desires, and their desires are initially godly. They're initially good. I'm going to go change the world, right? I'm going to go do all these things. I'm going to start committing my life to Christ now. I haven't committed my life to Christ before. I haven't really been a consistent Christian, but I'm going to start at the New Year's. We have January 1st coming up. I'm going to make this New Year's resolution, right? We've all met people like that who their desires are good, but they're lacking knowledge of Christ. They're not poring over the Scriptures. They're not putting Scriptures into their heart and into their soul. They're not walking lock and step with Christ and His Spirit. They have good desires, but they make haste. And they're like, all right, got to do this. We got to take this and run with it and just go. They have no plan, no direction, no idea where they're going. They just have this idea and they just want to take it and run with it. And it's a lot of that's like personality thing. And I'm not picking on people because I think like this. I'm wired this way. Ask Natalie. she's like the snap me back to reality. She's like, Jimmy, this is reality. Let me bring you back to reality. I need that. Because I'm one of these people that I'll get this idea and I'll be like, okay, yep, snap to it, let's go, But the Scriptures say when we do that, we sin. If we do that without knowledge, right? Think about Andrew. Like, going on a hike, that's a great thing. Like, in itself, not a bad thing. But as he's writing this story, he said, I knew better. I knew, right? The knowledge was there, but he didn't use it. He didn't apply that knowledge. I knew that I should have told people where I went. I should have had a plan. I should have told people, this is where my car's parked. I'm just going to spend a day in case anything happens. He knew there wasn't cell phone service where he was going. He had hiked this trail before. Whoever makes haste with his feet misses the way. Desire without knowledge is not good. A soul without knowledge is not good. And remember, it's one of Tex's favorite scriptures, right? The fear of God is what? It's the beginning of knowledge. The fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. Before we make haste with our feet, before we get all these ideas and just take them and run with them, we probably ought to sit and bask in the fear of God for a little bit and gain a little bit of knowledge and begin pouring this knowledge, the word that we have, the written word, we ought to pour that into our souls. Let that marinate for a bit and begin to come up with a plan of action. Right? Our theme this year, Paul is straining toward the goal. He writes about this elsewhere. He's like, I'm running a race. We're all running this race to get to that prize of the heavenward, upward calling. We're all in this together, but I don't run as somebody, waving my arms around and beating my chest. Paul says, I run with intention. He runs with the goal in mind. He knows where he's going, and nothing is going to stop him from getting there. That's knowledge. That's not running with haste. That's not just like, spur of the moment, just taking off and being all over the map. I think there are so many Christians today who are guided by their feelings, what they feel is right? What they want to do. As long as you're happy, right? Don't we hear that phrase a lot? Even among Christians, I hear this all the time. And it blows my mind, and I couldn't ever imagine telling my child who was about to get into an absolute disaster of a situation, but as long as you're happy, there, child, go, as long as you're happy. No. We talked about it in class, right? As long as you're righteous. As long as you honor God and you're living righteously, I will honor your decision to go down this path. But until then, we probably ought to think about the direction we're going. Even if it's a good desire or it seems like a good desire, take your time, stop, think about it, make a plan, and know where that goal is. know where you're going. This passage that Jacob read for us this morning, it's absolutely phenomenal because Job, I think, is such a prime example of somebody who could have gone in a million or maybe even a zillion different directions. But Job controlled the one thing in his life, and I would argue the only thing in his life that he could actually control. Job lost control of everything. Job lost everything. Job couldn't control his life. He couldn't control his health. He couldn't control his family. He couldn't love his family members enough to keep them alive. He did not have control over that. And it's an illusion if we think that we can love family members to health and wealth and, all these different things. We don't have control over as much as we think we have control over. But this thing he did, his integrity. Here's how that passage goes again. And Job again took up his discourse and said, "As God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right." He's speaking to his friends here. "Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I will hold fast to my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days." It's interesting, isn't it? He didn't run to his desires. He didn't run to what he thought was right or what he felt was right. He didn't say, well, I'm just going to try this out for a while. Job, in everything that he lost, said, there are two things that I'm going to hold on to, my integrity and righteousness. I will cling to those things. I will hold on to them. They are precious treasures to me, and I will not let them go. It's so fascinating because if we as God's children said that, you know what I think God would say? You know what I think God does say? You want to go down that path? Now I'm going to bless you. What I don't hear God saying is, again, it's the parent to the child, as long as it makes you happy. I don't hear God saying that. I hear God crying over his children, saying, what is happening to my church? I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, too, that with the culture just swaying and moving, the culture is so fluid, right? Morals are so fluid. They really are. What's acceptable now? Like, some of us are scratching our heads and being like, how did we, 5 years ago, how did the pendulum swing that far? Like, we're like, what in the world? And Christians slapping labels on people and being like, Jesus loves you, whatever you do, whatever you've done, whatever you're doing right now. It's just a really bizarre thing, but culture is very fluid and morality is fluid, and what's acceptable, what's culturally acceptable, what's morally acceptable, and even what's ethically acceptable. It's very fluid. If you're not pursuing righteousness and integrity. One of the things, it's just so blatantly obvious now, and it's always been around, but the absolute unprofessionalism and F-bombs. We walked into AutoZone. I walked into AutoZone the other day with my brother Mark, and Eden was with me. And the people behind the counter are F this, F that. It just flowed like wine and honey, Like it just was so natural. And I'm like, it's so fluid. It's so bizarre to me. Like there's no professionalism anymore. And no pride in work, no integrity, no honor in front of children. And it's just out there. It's just like where we're at. But instead of pursuing what we feel is right, what we want, what we think is right, the Proverbs say, stop, slow down, take a breath, pour knowledge into your soul. Begin with that. And Job, I think, again, is just an outpouring of that scripture being lived out. Job says, until I die, I'm going to hold fast to my integrity. Nobody can take that from me. Nobody can take that from me. And I hold fast to my righteousness, and I will not let it go. Church, I hope that we are people like this, that don't run, we're not like hasty with our feet and we just run to whatever desires we have. I hope we take time to stop and think and say, does this honor God? Does this decision honor God? Is this in step with God's Spirit? And is this righteous? And is this coming from a place of integrity within my soul? And we ought to have a checklist. And if things don't meet our checklist, we probably ought to, at a bare minimum, pause and shelf that for a little bit and say, maybe we ought to revisit this another time. But for now, I cannot go down this path. I cannot follow my heart's desire if it's leading me down this path. And I hope we spend this next week and just reflect on these things and find people who are in need. I can't ever overstate the need for us to step into the lives of people. People who are suffering, people who are without clothes and without water and who need things. That we step into their lives and that we help them. We see people struggling emotionally, spiritually. That we put away our selfish desires and that we actually pursue people. And that we teach them who Christ is and that we show the love of God and we show the love of Christ. Go out this week, bless people, and again, I always say it, see how God blesses you. If anybody's not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, or if you have prayer needs, we'd encourage you to come up. So we all stand and we'll sing this place. I just read the song. This song together.